In this short video, I'm going to talk about dialect variation. There are a number of terms necessary to understanding what is meant by dialect variation, and understanding what linguists mean when they use these terms is important, because linguists often use these terms differently than the way they are used every day. Or dialect of the language that is endorsed by schools, grammar books, and sometimes the media and the government. Linguists are careful to assert that referring to one dialect as the standard is not a claim that it's better than others. The standard variety is more privileged, but that doesn't mean its speakers are smarter or better speakers or more deserving of social opportunities. All it really means is that they've had the opportunity to learn the standard and have the inclination to use it, and that's all it really says about them. Some linguists prefer the term variety to the term dialect. Mooney and Evans explain, very often non-linguists use the term dialect in a pejorative way. To say, for example, that Australian English is not a variety in its own right, but merely a dialect of British English, immediately places Australian English in a subordinate position to British English. I will, however, continue to use the term dialect and speak of dialect variation. And I'm using this term as linguists intend it to be used. It carries no negative connotations. One dialect is not considered superior to others, nor is a language considered superior to a dialect. Now, slang refers to certain lexical items, and it says very little about phonological, grammatical, morphological, or pragmatic aspects of language, so it doesn't cover the same territory as dialect. Similarly, jargon refers to lexical items, but is associated with certain particular spheres of activities, of expertise in activities, such as terms used in academic disciplines or terms used in different professions. Neither jargon nor slang cover the same territory as dialect. Likewise, when we're speaking of accent, we're not talking about the same territory as dialect because we're only referring to phonology, where dialect could include aspects of lexicon, phonological aspects, morphological aspects, some syntax, all can be covered under dialect. Now, a dialect is one of several distinguishable varieties, generally but not always mutually intelligible, of a language. A dialect has features on all levels of language, including lexical, phonological, morphosyntactic, and pragmatic. Linguists use this term to refer to any language variety, regardless of its social status. So, in that definition, we say that dialects are not always mutually intelligible. I'm going to talk about three subtopics related to this: mutual comprehensibility, dialect chains, and dialects as political. Why do some linguists joke that the difference between a dialect and a language is that a language is a dialect that has an army and an air force? Is Quebecois French a language or a dialect? What would make it a language versus a dialect? The question of what makes two varieties different languages or different dialects of the same language is not as easily answered as one might think. Usually in answering this question, we say that if two speakers of two varieties can understand each other, if they're mutually comprehensible, then they are using dialects of the same language. But this isn't so straightforward. Even if we discount the reality that comprehensibility is always a matter of degree, there are many cases where speakers of what are considered different but related languages can understand each other. So they're speaking different languages, but they can understand each other. And there are just as many cases where speakers of what are considered two varieties of the same language cannot. Often, a speaker of a standard dialect will be understood by a speaker of a non-standard variety, but not vice versa. And this is where we get into dialect chains. Within what is considered one language, there may be dialects that are not mutually comprehensible. A speaker of dialect A might understand speakers of B and C, but speakers of B might not understand C, and speakers of C might not understand B. Imagine, for example, speaking with a speaker of standard Australian English and understanding her with little problem. But when encountering a speaker of a non-standard variety of Australian English, not being able to understand them. The speaker of standard Australian English might understand both of you with very little difficulty. So the line between dialects and languages are not as clear as we might think. And when we say that a language is a dialect with an army and an air force, we're suggesting that the decision to declare something a separate language, as opposed to a dialect of another language, may be more political than it is linguistic. The important point for linguists and linguistic study, explains Schilling, is not whether we choose to call a variety a language or a dialect, or whether we choose to uphold a particular variety as a standard, but that all language varieties, no matter what their label or their political or social standing, are equally linguistically well-formed and operate according to precise patterns or rules. In most discussions of dialects in a linguistics textbook, you will read the assertion that dialects have regular patterning, and probably you'll see some examples to illustrate this, and the most frequent example in these textbooks is usually that of African American English. The choice to demonstrate that African American English follows regular grammar patterns that vary from the standard but are predictable and observable is to combat the social stigma and prejudice that surrounds popular discussions of this variety. Popular prejudice sees the differences between African American English and the standard as being due to laziness or ignorance or improper socialization. Linguists see the difference as being due to none of these things, nor reflective of any inadequacy. The differences between one dialect and another do not reflect the character of the speakers. If one dialect is privileged over another, that's a social privilege, and not an indication of linguistic worth. One more related point. Many people are able to speak more than one dialect, often a standard and a non-standard variety. Speakers of non-standard varieties are often able to use the standard variety as well. The decision to use the standard or the non-standard may be entirely contextual. Sociolinguistic studies have shown it may even depend on who the speaker is speaking with and how they want to be seen by those whom they're speaking with. Other studies have shown that the variety could shift with the topic of the conversation. People may prefer a standard variety when talking about university or work, and a non-standard variety when speaking about their hometown, for example.